we're on page 141, the second paragraph under drawing connections. Scientists think that whales and some types of hoofed mammals have a common ancestor, as figure 6 shows. This ancestor was probably a mammal that lived on land between 50 and 70 million years ago. During this time period, the dinosaurs died out and a variety of mammals appeared in the fossil record. The first ocean-dwelling mammals appeared about 50 million years ago. Scientists think that all mammal species alive today evolved from common ancestors. Scientists have named and described hundreds of thousands of living and ancient species. Scientists use information about these species to sketch out a tree of life that includes all known organisms. But scientists know that their information is incomplete. For example, parts of the Earth history lack a fossil record. In fact, fossils are rare because specific conditions are necessary for fossils to form. All right, page 142, examining organisms. Examining an organism carefully can give scientists clues about its ancestors. For example, whales seem similar to fish, but unlike fish, whales breathe air, give birth to live young, and produce milk. These traits show that whales are mammals. Thus, scientists think that whales evolved from ancient mammals. Case study, evolution of the whale. Scientists think that the ancient ancestor of whales was probably a mammal that lived on land and could run on 4 legs. A more recent ancestor was probably a mammal that spent time on both land and in water. Comparison of modern whales and a large number of fossils have supported this hypothesis. Figure 7 illustrates some of this evidence. Walking whales. The organisms in Figure 7 form a sequence between the ancient 4-legged mammals and modern whales. Several pieces of evidence indicate that these species are related by ancestry. Each species shared some traits with an earlier species. However, some species had new traits that were shared with later species. Yet, each species had traits that allowed it to survive in a particular time and place in Earth's history. Further evidence can be found inside the bodies of living whales. For example, although modern whales do not have hind limbs, inside their bodies are tiny hip bones, as shown in Figure 7. Scientists think that these hip bones were inherited from the whale's 4-legged ancestors. Scientists often look at this kind of evidence when they want to determine the relationship between organisms. Page 144, comparing organisms. Evidence that groups of organisms have common ancestry can be found by comparing the group's DNA. Because every organism inherits DNA, every organism inherits the traits determined by DNA. Organisms contain evidence that populations and species undergo changes in traits in DNA over time. Comparing skeletal structures. What do your arm, the front leg of a cat, the front flipper of a dolphin, and the wing of a bat have in common? You might notice that these structures do not look alike and are not used in the same way. But under the surface, they have similarities. Look at Figure 8. The structure and order of bones of a human arm are similar to those of the front limbs of a cat, a dolphin, and a bat. These similarities suggest that cats, dolphins, bats, and humans have a common ancestor. Over millions of years, changes occurred in the limb bones. Eventually, the bones performed different functions in each type of animal. Comparing DNA. When scientists compare organisms' traits, such as skeletal structures, much of the information they get supports the theory that organisms share a common ancestor. To further support this theory, scientists compare organisms' DNA at a molecular level. Scientists may analyze organisms' DNA, RNA, proteins, and other molecules. Then, scientists compare the data for each species. The greater the number of similarities between the data sets for any 2 species, the more closely the 2 species are related through a common ancestor. Scientists use molecular data, the comparison of traits, and fossils to support the theory that because all existing species have DNA, all species have a common ancestor. All right, so let's look at this summary. It says, evolution is the process in which inherited characteristics within a population change over generations, sometimes giving rise to new species. Scientists continue to develop theories to explain how evolution happens. Evidence that organisms evolve can be found by comparing living organisms to each other and the fossil record. Such comparisons provide evidence of common ancestry. Scientists think that the modern whales evolved from an ancient land-dwelling mammal ancestor. Fossil organisms that support this hypothesis have been found. And evidence of common ancestry among living organisms is provided by comparing DNA and inherited traits. Species that have a common ancestor will have traits in DNA that are more similar to each other than those of distantly related species.